questions about about Matan Torah and so on. Now we're going to get into the general idea of Matan Torah. Okay, to be able to understand all the questions that he asked about Matan Torah and Gevura and why does it start with Shem Elekim, and then he mixes Shem Elekim with Shem Havaya and so on. So to be able to understand this, we have to first preface the general novelty of the giving of the Torah. Prior to Matan Torah, there was a decree, there was the cut, like the Rebbe a lot of times calls Gezeda from the word cutting, between that the above, those above should not descend below, and those below should not ascend above. By Matan Torah, and by Matan Torah, the decree was nullified. And those above descended below, and those below ascended above. In such a way that Hashem says, I begin. Like it says, that Havaya descended on Har Sinai, so he began this process. And then Maamar, afterwards it says that the Moshe said, go up to Hashem, that rise up to Hashem. In other words, the idea of Tachtoinim Ya'alal Yoinim, that those below should go up above. The idea behind this is, what's the novelty of this stopping of the separation? Though Torah study existed even prior to the giving of the Torah, that's the idea of the Torah that our forefathers studied to such a degree that it says that yeshiva did never cease, a place of learning did not cease from our forefathers, even when they were enslaved in Mitzrayim for 210 years. They were in Mitzrayim. Still in all in what type of way was the Torah study? The above remained above, and the below remained below. Even the physical items with which the Avos fulfilled the mitzvahs did not change from their physical state, did not become elevated or permeated with ruchnius in any way. And the same thing, the same thing, the effect that a Yid had through his avodah down here below, before Matan Torah, the effect that it had above, top of the next page, it was in such a way that it only reached the root of the created beings. We know that by a person's own effort, he could only reach to his own root and his own source. A person by his own efforts cannot jump higher than himself, meaning higher than his own root and source. So before Matan Torah, when there was a cut between us and above, the most we could reach would be the root and source of the Nevroi. Even in the ultimate perfection of the reaching the highest, most level of the root, it's only the root of the created beings, that is totally distant and incomparable to the Eibishter, as we're about to explain. This is more or less where we left off yesterday. Why are they Why are they ultimate distance? Because since the Creator and the creation, even the way the creation is in its utmost perfect state, meaning talking with the root of the creation, still in all, they are incomparable one to another. This itself, this distance, this chasm between the Boire and the Nivra, that itself is the cut, the decree between the ones above and the ones below. There's no way of bridging that gap until Matan Torah came along. As far as the novelty of the giving of the Torah is the joining between them. This means the one below, the way he is below, should ascend to be in the category of something that is above. Like it occurred by Matan Torah temporarily, that we spoke about, that Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem told him to go up to Har Sinai. So temporarily, the Tachten went up. And then we were empowered for the time following the Matan Torah that we're able to change, transform those down here below. So the Torah, the giving of the Torah was the empowerment for what would take place, our avodah past Matan Torah. This is what Chazal said, all the mitzvahs that the forefathers fulfilled before you were only like a smell, like a scent. A scent is only something that perfume gives off. It's not the actual perfume itself. It's not the actual thing itself. Indicating that the mitzvahs were only a ray. But us, it says, Shemen turak shmecha, that the oil was poured for your sake. What is the idea of the oil? The oil of the perfume instead of just the scent of the oil. When you use the word turak, that's like when you empty out, you pour out from one vessel to another. When you're pouring from one vessel to another, it's not just like smelling the perfume, but it's Yeshles Hashem and Atzma. You have the very oil itself you took from one vessel and poured into the other. Hainu, this means etzem muhus hadavar, you have the very thing itself. That is what takes place by mitzvahs following Matan Torah, as opposed to the mitzvahs before Matan Torah. This is the reason that in the Aseres HaDibros it speaks about very ordinary things. That was one of the questions we asked at the beginning of the Maamar. Why do we need to have all these special effects with the thunder and lightning and flames and smoke if we're speaking about very simple matters? Kivan sheklolos hanekuda b'chidush Matan Torah, the general point in the uniqueness of the giving of the Torah is hamshacha b'tachtonim dafke, is bringing it down, the Torah down here below into this world. And that's why, even though we're dealing with the most mundane things, that's the big tumult, that's the big special effects. In this, in the giving of the Torah, dealing with the most mundane matters, is the general intention of Hashem's desire to have a home down here below. That's also the reason why when Hashem gave the Yidden the Torah, He gave it to them the way they're down here in this earth. And not in such a manner. Hashem could have taken the Yidden up into heaven and given them Torah over there. Instead, He gave it to them down here because that's the whole purpose. The purpose is to permeate this world. The purpose is to make a home down here below. And for that very purpose, the big tumult of Aseres HaDibros is in the most ordinary types of mitzvahs. So there should be able to be the joining of the above and below. It's the idea of the descent of above down here below. The way that the one that's below, that it should become refined and ascend through the one above. So there needs to be two movements. There has to be a movement from both directions. You need to have the drawing down from above to below. And also, you need to elevate the one below to the above. That's what it says in the voice. Yechezkel, it says, that the Chayis were rushing forth and back. And the Alter Rebbe explains, Chayis does not just refer to the Malachim, Kepirish Rabbeinu Azok, like the Alter Rebbe explains, top of page test, it's referring not only to the Malachim that are known as Chayis, the Chayis of the divine chariot, Elog al Chayis ha'or va'or alekisha kol ha'madregas ha'seder ishtalshus. When it says a Chayis rotzi v'shoiv, it's referring to the vitality and the godly light of all the levels of the chain order of descent. Mereish kol dargin, outside kol dargin, from the beginning and the top of all levels until the end of all levels. Shuba oifen the rotzi v'shoiv, it's in a way of rushing and returning. The idea of rushing is the idea of Gevura is about aliyah. Gevura is about like fire that goes upwards. It's ascending. V'shoivu inyan chesed v'amshocha. Shoiv is the return. That's the idea of chesed. Chesed is about amshocha, coming down like water that comes from a high place to a low place. And this point is going to explain what we spoke about at the beginning of the Maamar, about that says Shem Havayin, Shem Elekim, and Vidaber, and Lamer, always going between that connection of Gvur and Chesed, because both of them are necessary in the process of the Hamshacha and the joining and the elevation of below. So he says in line 7, the second paragraph, the idea behind this is the ultimate purpose is the effect in the created being that it should be in the way of a traveler. The neshama, before it descended down here below, is in a way that it's standing still. And that is similar to the malachim above. So too by malachim, that they are called ones that are standing still. What is the idea of standing still? By malachim and neshames v'hainu shem rak v'madrega achas. It indicates that they are essentially in one level. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't move at all. Though above there are many levels, and so too down here below in the world, there's multiple levels. Like it says, that there are girls to no number. Al tikra alamas ella oilamas. So the Chazal say, do not read it girls, but worlds. Shem ba'oifen shall ribuyein mispar. They're in a way that they are a multitude that's impossible to count. So how is it possible that the neshamas and the malachim are just standing still like that? So the explanation is because Mikol Makim calls of Madrega Achas. All of this is still in one level. He says, therefore it's important to affect in the created being the idea of traveling, which it doesn't have above, it doesn't have in the Olam Esel that the perfection of it is of traveling is when you have two lines. Traveling is not just a one-way street. Traveling is in two ways, as he's about to explain what that means. Similar to what's explained in Torah and what the Chazal says. Did then an action come to your hand? It's a very interesting story that the Gemara relates that when Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma was sick, Rabbi Hanani ben Tradian came to visit him, and he was known for being Meifetz Torah, and Rabbi Yosef, under the Roman decrees against spreading Torah, and Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma had told him, don't you know that Hashem gave control to the Romans? What are you doing? They can kill you for this and so on. And he said that Hashem will have rachmanis. And he answered him, what type of words is that? Hashem will have rachmanis. That's not a response. And then afterwards, Rav Chanan ben Tradian asked Rav Yosef ben Kisma, Am I a ben olam habas? Rav Yosef ben Kisma asked him, Klum maisa bali yodcha. Did you have some type of action? And he said, yes, I remember that one time I had money that I set aside for my own Purim meal, and I got it mixed up with money that I set aside to give out to poor people, and I gave it all away to the poor people, and I didn't subtract from my own money from it. I just gave it all away to the poor people. So then he said, now you are ben olam haba. In other words, he was learning Torah and Mesiras Nefesh. That wasn't enough. He needed to prove it by action. So the Alter Rebbe explains, Torah study and Gemilas Chasadim are two opposite things. Torah study is more of an introverted type of person, a Marish Chayra. Gemilas Chasadim is more expansive, an outgoing person, an extrovert, and that's more of a Mara Levena. As long as you're learning Torah, even in Mesiras Nefesh, I don't know yet that you're doing it because of your devotion to Hashem. But once I see that you're doing it in both kavim, then I know that it's a service of Hashem. So now we'll see it inside. This Nekuda that Alter Rebbe explains in Torah. Line 20. As long as the avodah is in one line, it's impossible to know if it's a true service of Hashem. Maybe it's his nature. An introverted person is going to sit and study, even if it means risking his life. That's the nature of an introvert. Only when we see in his service also the opposite line. In other words, Gemils Chasadim, usually introverted people, do not go out of their way to do kindness to others. But when we saw that Brachanini Ben Tradian had this type of devotion, he gave all of his money away, even that which he put away for his Purim Suda. Avodah Amit is top of page Yud. So it's a proof that his Avodah is a true service. And where do we see the true service? Because the perfection of a person is when you have two lines. You need to have both things. That's the difference between a person and a malach and a behema. A malach is also those malachim that serve with love, like Malach Michal in his camp. Those malachim that serve with gevura, with awe. A person is koilel everything in him. We can connect it with what was explained in Sichos in earlier Farbrengens of that year. In explaining the Mishnah, that it says in Pirkei Avos, what is a dispute? That for the sake of heaven that will continue and exist, that's the Machloikis of Hillel and Shammai. The Hillel of Shammai and Bechinas Chesed Gevura, they represent the midas of Chesed and Gevura. Specifically, the Machloikis of Hillel v'Shammai that represent Chesed and Gevura, two polar opposite midas, is a dispute for the sake of heaven, and it will eventually, it will exist for all time. The existence of something is dependent upon having both matters together of Chesed and Gevura. The general idea of the two lines, that through that is the perfection of of a person, is the line of rushing towards and also the return. By a person, what does that mean in the simple sense? It's the turning away from bad, that's ascending, that's rotzi. And the doing good is about returning and bringing down. So now we can understand why we have these two extremes in the Aseret HaDibros. This word says that Hashem spoke to him, saying, since the perfection of the avodah is through joining the two lines of Rotzi v'Shoiv, of rushing and returning, Shem Chesed Gvuram, that they are the Shoiv is Chesed and the Rotzi is Gvuram. That's why in the pasuk there are both aspects, like he asked at the beginning of the Maamar. Vidaber loshen kasha. The word dibur indicates a hard way of speaking, a tough way, gvura. The lamer and saying shu loshen raka. As we know, amira is in a soft way. That's why it says koi soimer lebeis yankiv. That's why in the beginning of Aseret HaDibros, both names of Havaya, which is Chesed, and Elkim, which represents Gevura, is mentioned. I am Havaya, your God. But at the beginning of the matter, it says only Vaydaber Elkim, which is what we asked. Also, at the beginning of the Maamar, why is he started with Vaydaber Elkim? Because the ultimate purpose is to affect and down here below and the concealment of the name Elekim. That's the end of the Maamar. We are now going to go on